As promised, here is going to be microscopic structure of bone, so you will see what all these things are. And in particular, we're going to spend a lot of time looking at compact bone because it's just more complex and perhaps more interesting. To the naked eye, it does look solid. It looks so solid that if you first saw compact bone and then saw it under the microscope, you would think you were hallucinating. But you're not. It has this complex set of shapes, and they are essential for keeping it healthy. Those shapes come from the fact that compact bone is made of osteons or Haversian systems, and those themselves are made of concentric layers, concentric cylinders, basically, of thick mineral bone tissue, and in between these layers you find cells, and then going down the middle you find an empty space which would have blood vessels and nerves. So when you see this circular stuff, that's an osteon or Haversian system, and here the artist has drawn as if you could pull it out and separate the layers from each other. So you can see that. And yeah, osteon, well, if you look at architecture of skyscraper tall buildings around the world, in the 1960s they were really pursuing real skyscrapers that are 80 stories tall. So for example, in Chicago, the Sears Tower was for a long time the tallest building in the world, and it used an architectural idea of tubes within tubes. So if you look up architecture tubes within tubes, what you see basically is going to be osteons. And what that idea gives is it makes a building or a bone able to resist twisting and bending. Because each osteon has some ability to resist twisting and bending. And when you put two next to each other, they would have to move relative to each other if twisting or bending was going to happen, and they are not going to do that. So if you look at the design of the Sears Tower, what you see is, I think, 9 separate towers that are integrated together to give it a lot of solidity. And there's that. Okay, so compact bone in osteons is made of layers, and they are, not shockingly, called lamellae. A lamella is singular. There you go. And this is a better drawing because you can see the little cells with the little purple nuclei. Yeah, so this is a lamella. This is another lamella. This is a third lamella. Okay? What you could not see in those diagrams, but you can see here, is that when the lamellae are made, the collagen fibers run around them in a helix, and each successive lamella has that helix in the opposite orientation, and that is going to make the whole thing stiffer, and it's going to resist twisting, but also that allows it to resist bending. Okay, so what are these spaces we find in compact bone? Well, we have central canals or Haversian canals, and that's where the blood vessels, arteries and veins, and nerves would run through the bone. We also have connections between those central canals called perforating or Volkmann's canals. So this central canal can be connected to this central canal through this perforating or Volkmann's canal. It gets more complicated when we look closer. What we see is that between the lamellae are spaces, really irregularly shaped spaces that end up becoming lacunae where osteocytes are going to live. And osteocytes have this really weird shape because the lacunae have a weird shape. And I do need to draw this because it is very difficult to visualize. And so here I'm going to draw a space between two lamellae, and what you're going to see is that the lamellae themselves are not, well, they're solid, but they have a lot of little spaces. So if this is a lamella, it has spaces like that in it. So I'm drawing a lamella with these spaces, and it would be kind of thick, and it would have other ones on that side, and they're kind of random. So that's a lamella, and down here, so if we fill this in, this is terrible, but I just want you to understand this is the solid part, this is bone, this is a mineral bone tissue. Okay? And that is mineral bone tissue, that's mineral bone tissue, that's mineral bone tissue. Yeah, this is terrible, but it is necessary for you to see what's going on. And if we had another one here, we'd have a big area like that. And we have another, whatever, another lamella here. I really wish I hadn't started this way, but this is important. What you then get are the osteocytes living in the lamella, and they fill all the space. So this one is going to fill all the available space. This is all one cell. It's going to fill all of this space, and it's going to end. It's going to end here. Fill all this space and all this space and all this space. That's all one cell. That's an osteocyte, and I have to give it a nucleus. That's a nucleus. Okay, so that would be one osteocyte. And then I guess the other osteocyte that would be next to it would be galaxy pen and not rainbow. And it's going to look subtly different, but not different enough that it's like easy to see or anything, because that would be too easy. This is the next cell. So they meet up against each other right here. Whoops. And then this is going to be the nucleus of the second osteocyte. So what you will see in the pictures is this strange appearance, this strange spider-like appearance, they say, of the osteocytes, and that's because of the little cracks in the lamellae. And the idea is that the osteocytes are in close contact with the mineral surfaces of the bone. Everywhere. Everywhere in a bone, there is a nearby cell very close to it. So that's osteocytes. And so we would say that these little tiny offshoots are canaliculi, or like miniature canals is what they're called, canaliculi. What else? Right, and these cells, this osteocyte, where it meets this osteocyte, they're connected by gap junctions. Gap junctions, if you'll remember from epithelial cells, are they're physical connections of cytosol in neighboring cells. What that means is that small molecules can move from the cytosol of this osteocyte to the cytosol of this osteocyte. And that allows both chemical signaling, but also sharing of some nutrients. So it's a really dynamic and active area inside inside bone. So we have seen now what's in a Haversian system. We've seen the lamellae, we've seen the canaliculi, and the osteocytes that live in between. We've seen the central canal or Haversian canal that has the blood cells or blood vessels and nerves. Now what we see is big lamellae. So they're not thick, but they're big. They wrap all the way around the bone, and those are the circumferential lamellae. And those are going to, those are going to resist twisting forces of the entire bone. Let's see. So, right, if I give you this diagram on the exam, you should be able to label all of this. Yeah. And I do always put this on the exam, so be ready for that. Whoops, I could have kept clicking. Right, so all of this are the structures you'll need to know for long bone, or compact bone, I should say. Furthermore, now this should make more sense to you. Now you should be able to identify this 3-2-1 pause. Yes, that is a central canal. And this 3-2-1 pause is an osteon or Haversian system with lamellae all around the outside, and these dark spots are the cells, the osteocytes. What are these little radial things sticking out? Those are the canaliculi that are full of little projections of the osteocytes. So this is also something you would have to be able to label to that degree. Okay. Spongy bone is not nearly as complicated. So it doesn't have osteons or its own blood vessels. It is all in contact with bone marrow that has blood vessels and stuff. And yeah, endosteum. So the endosteum is going to connect to the osteocytes and nourish them, so to speak. One of the last bone structure things I want to show you is that the spongy bone inside a bone does give it strength. So the compact bone is much stronger than spongy bone. That is obvious. And compact bone is dense and heavy. And so our bones are not made of just compact bone, or else we would be way heavier and we wouldn't have a good place to store our bone marrow anyway. But what we should see is that the anatomy of the internal spongy bone lines up with lines of compression and tension in these bones. So for example, this is a femur, and if you put all the body weight on the head of the femur, which you do whenever you stand on one foot, all of your body weight is pushing down right here. There are enormous compressive forces on this side and tension forces on this side. And so the spongy bone handles that, but also what you would find, my apologies, I was gesturing and I hit my microphone. Sorry about that. If you look at the orientation of the trabeculae and the spongy bone, you see they line up with the compression and tension lines in the bone. So they do add strength. So let's stop this video here. You have now seen the microscopic structure of bone tissue. So this has been bone tissue. And next we'll look at bone growth, bone development. And awesome that will be.